Hi, I'm Renee Tucci, and it is the autumn season. Let's celebrate the bounty with a cornucopia design. Today we're using a pre-made cornucopia. These are fairly easy to find at local craft stores and of course your local retail florist. It is a beautiful basket design, but I want to personalize it a little bit. So I have here some moss. I have some sheet moss. It's a greenish brown, fresh material, and it comes in sheets. And I have pre-ripped a few sections here that I'm going to actually add on to the horn part of our cornucopia. So I'm going to take this moss and just drape it over the basket, and then using some bind wire, which is paper covered wire, very, very, very versatile, easy and wonderful to use. I'm going to start wrapping that around the moss to hold it in place on the basket. Once I get it wrapped around and twisted into place, I can simply pull myself some slack here and create some more layers with the bind wire to tighten it up, because we don't want it to be too puffy out on the outside of the basket. So there's one piece. I still want to see some of the grapevine, some of the basket material though, so I'm not going to cover it completely, but let me add another piece on the other side. And the moss is really easy to work with. You simply rip to get it to be the size that you need. I always give it a little shake to shake off the extra natural pieces that come out of the moss. And I'm going to drape this just like that. And I haven't cut the bind wire, so that's going to just continue to wrap around the basket to hold that in place. Okay. And I think I'll do one last bit of moss on the tip here, just so that it looks cohesive. And again, I don't want it to be a perfect cover, so perhaps something like this, where it does go all the way to the end, but from different perspectives, you can still see parts of the basket underneath. Okay, so that's added a little more natural life and look to our design here, to our vessel, to our cornucopia. And the bind wire has done a good job of harnessing all the moss. So I'm going to trim that off, just use some wire cutters, and slip this end into an area of the bind wire that is crisscrossing another section, and just create a knot that will disappear into the moss area. And then once you've got that tied off, you can clip away any excess bind wire, and you'll have a nice tidy wrap. Okay. So again, that's just given my basket a little bit more personality. I'm going to add another layer to this. So this is by the same company that makes the bind wire, the Smithers Oasis company. This is called rustic wire, and it's actually has an internal wire structure that's heavier, a heavier gauge, and then a wrap on the outside that is more like a raffia color. And I like the color contrast on that against the moss here. And I'm just going to create a random pattern with my rustic wire and slip the ends into the weaves of the basket so that it just disappears there. And again, same thing with the other side. And that's just added a geometric pattern to the outside of our mossy cornucopia. And we need just one more element to our body before we can start on the lower half, and that would be some magnolia leaves. So I have some magnolia that was fresh and I allowed it to dry. So it's got that great texture to it. I don't have to worry about it needing water. So I'll just pop a few of these off of the branch. And I'm actually going to slide them under the wires that I've already laid here. And by doing that, again, I'm bringing some of the organic material from the base up into the horn. And it is easier to do this before you add the flowers into the base. Now I'm going to keep in mind that I want all of my leaves facing the same direction, and they're going to point to the end, or the horn, the pointed end of the basket here. And I'm just going to work with them and add a few more in until I'm happy with their position. Okay, so we finished adding the personality, as I like to call it, to the outside of our cornucopia. We've got the moss layer, the double wire, and then we've threaded the magnolia leaves into the wire wraps. Now we could certainly glue those into place as well if we were concerned about their security, but they're holding into these wire wraps just fine, and they've nestled into the moss, so they'll be great. Now let's work on our internal structure. We're going to need something to hold our flowers, of course, but I also want to take good advantage of this interior horn part of the cornucopia. So I have actually made a pillow out of plastic coated chicken wire. I just cut a rectangular piece of it, bent it back on itself, and folded it into a pillow shape. And I'm going to set this right at the opening of the basket, right here. Now, that's helpful. The pillow shape is helpful because now I have a double layer that I'm working with, and any stems that I insert into here will be balanced and held in place by that. Then I have a 6-inch loamy dish that I have pre-stuffed with a half a brick of floral foam, and I've just held that in place with a little waterproof tape. I'll set that right in the lower part here, and then I like to work on a turntable, so we're gonna set this on here. Now, of course, all of the weight is where the floral foam is. You could certainly fill the entire thing with floral foam. You could use a long rectangular dish set inside here filled with foam. But in a time when we're trying to be more aware and conscious of our use of materials in the environment, I thought it might be a little more helpful to minimize my foam and still be able to utilize the back of the horn with the chicken wire application. So it's sort of a hybrid design, if you will. Now, the great part about back here is that I can add things in that don't need water, and they can still add to the design, and then put my more sensitive materials that do need water into the foam. So we're going to start with those materials. I have an assortment of flowers here that I have already cut into smaller form, just for easier video shooting. And I'm going to start creating the bulk of my design here with them. Now I've got some beautiful ornamental kale here. I'm going to strip away some of the bottom on the kale and just expose that inner flower. You can actually reflex the petals on an ornamental kale, and that just means popping the petals back and open so that it's as showy as possible. Now, because of the size of these, the fact that they are a mass flower, and they could also be a form flower, but I think in this design they're really more of a mass flower. I am going to sink them in first. I want to make sure that they get a good position low into our design, and also they have a very thick stem. So again, I want to make sure I get them into the foam when I have all of my real estate still available. Excuse me. And I'm going to anchor this in really well down close to the foam in our center area. Now, it's going to lend to our focal point, but it's not going to be the entirety of our focal point, and that's simply because of its color. Purple, as you can see, this ornamental kale is predominantly purple with some green venations, and that's a receding color. So therefore, it's not going to stand out as much, and it won't contribute much to our focal point from a distance. So I want to make sure I have some other materials in there as well that will help with the focal. And so we'll nestle this piece in down low, just like that. And so now that I have my big pieces in, I do want to go ahead and establish my focal. And I'm going to do that with some flowers that are peach in color. Now, that may seem like counterintuitive to a normal autumnal design where orange is used a lot. But if you think about it, peach is just a tint of orange. So a tint is anytime you take a color and you add white to it. So it certainly fits within the color harmony for a fall design. And I like it because it's a little more muted, a little more delicate. So we've got some beautiful peach garden roses here that we're adding in, and we're adding them in a group. So they're going to be grouped together. And I also have this beautiful, really special protea. Now I only have one of these and that's all we need. For a design like this, it doesn't have to be 2, 3, 4, 5 of a specific flower. You can really make a good use out of just one or a few stems. I'm cutting all of my stems pretty short because we don't want it to be taller than the cornucopia itself. And I'm going to anchor that just above the roses so that it is a star flower. Now I've got it a little bit longer than my kale because I want to make sure that it stands out. Now we are working with a heavy base here, and it's a long basket. So I want to make sure proportionally I'm taking advantage of that. So I'm going to be aware to really elongate my design as much as I can as well. So we're going to come out the front as well as the middle and the top. So I will leave some of my roses a little bit longer for that purpose. There we go. All right, so I have a nice grouping of these roses here. You could even very gently with your fingers massage those petals back and open a little bit. You could even do the old blow on it trick and puff those petals open even further. I'm going to balance this cluster with another one over here. There we go. Because this is a centerpiece, it's meant to be seen from all sides. So we want to make sure there's interest from all sides. And you can see each time I cut my stem, I'm removing any debris that might be on the stem, the part of the stem that's going to go into the foam. We always want to add flowers in cleanly. I think I need to trim this just a bit shorter. There we go. All right. Now I've got another large flower to add in, and this is a mum, a disbud, also known as a rover mum. And I'm going to add these in actually on the other side of our design, right down here. This is introducing another color, the burgundy color family, which is again perfect for this color palette and the autumnal time of year. And we'll do this in a group as well. Okay, so I've got the main framework for my design here. I want to go ahead and add in some of my heavier elements that are going to go in the center using the chicken wire structure. So I have some miniature gourds, and I've taken a bamboo skewer and I've just poked that right into the gourd, and I'm going to lay that into my chicken wire on an angle that will hold it for me. And I'm going to do these in clusters as well, in groups. There we go. And I'm okay that that last one that I just put in was in a little bit deeper. We're playing with the depth on this a little bit, which is why, similar to how we have the kale pushed in a little bit, we've got the gourds set in a little bit. I also have a miniature pumpkin. This time with this skewer I've used 2, so I've got 1 and 1. That will just keep it from spinning because it is a heavier item. Now this I actually think I'm going to put on this side, into the foam. And the bamboo skewers are going to expand when they get wet, and they're going to lock that miniature pumpkin right into place. So that's going to work out great. Now I have some greens I want to add into this before I add my smaller blooms. And I'm going to start with some eucalyptus, which is really beautiful and of course aromatic. I love using aromatics in autumnal designs. I think they fit just perfectly. So this has a great long stem on it. So I'm going to use this piece to help establish some of that length out of the front. Now don't be afraid to pick up the flowers as you need to find your foam. Add your stem back in. Hold your container still while you press it in. There we go. And then I have a second piece, and this one I'm actually going to add up into our chicken wire area. This eucalyptus is going to dry very similar to how it looks fresh, so I'm not worried about it having water or not. So we'll set that in there. I've got a little bottom piece here. I'm gonna add that into my foam just to bring some of that color to that side. There we go. So you can see how it's taking shape. Now I've got some agonis foliage, which is a burgundy colored foliage. So that's perfect for starting to bring in some more tones of the rover mums. So you can see it's a small leaf, so it's very much in contrast of the texture of the eucalyptus. And again, this dries just like it looks. So I'm going to add some of this up into the top portion of our design and down in and around on the sides. For any piece that you put in, always giving a fresh cut, clearing the stems of anything that might get into the foam. It's sort of habit when you're working with something like this to just want to break a lateral off of the main stem, but you have to go behind that and always give a fresh cut, because when you break it, it gives a very messy end, and that will not slide into your foam easily at all. And that will create some problems for the structure of your design. Okay, so you can see I'm working the sides of this. I'm adding the pieces into the chicken wire part from the side. And I'm still keeping an eye on the front of my design. Make sure we've got that nice flow from back to front. So with something like this, you have to work a little bit front, a little bit back, and just keep working on it so that it stays balanced. Okay, there we go. Okay, and I think I have one more piece of that foliage. Yep. I'm going to add one more piece of that foliage on this side. Also on this side of our design, to balance out the rover mums that are on the other side, I've got a few pieces of burgundy amaranthus, and that's a really gorgeous texture. It's got a great drape to it, and that's going to lay beautifully out the side of our design and drape down. Oops. The more and more we add in here, the more fragile it becomes. Then you need to use one hand to hold it as you're adding another piece in. Now, I just want to add a few more elements. Because we have that magnolia in the basket piece itself, I want to add some into the design so that we have some unity between the whole piece. So I have some pieces of the dried magnolia here. And again, even though it's dried, it can be added into the foam area. That won't hurt it at all. So if that's where you need it to be to fill a spot, go ahead and do that. But we can also set it into the chicken wire back because it's dry. It doesn't need any water. There we go. And that's filling that spot in quite nicely. I also have some yarrow, which is really, really beautiful. And again, going to dry beautifully. So this is very long lasting. And I'm gonna set this in. Because yellow, as opposite of purple, is an advancing color, I'm gonna sink that in a little lower because I know it will shine through with its natural color. And again, because this will dry just like it looks, this can be added into the top and the back. The yarrow is acting a bit as our filler. So you can see the main flowers and components were grouped together, and then the filler and the greenery is spread throughout the design for consistency and unity. There we go. Okay. Now I just have a few finishing touches to add, one of them being orange slices. I have actually sliced an orange and dried it in my oven. It's very simple to do. You set your oven to about 200 degrees and put your slices on some parchment paper in your oven. And maybe after 2 or 3 hours, start flipping them, and then maybe every 30-45 minutes, check them, flip them again until they're dried. And they just smell divine. So again, adding a touch of the aromatics to this design. I'm actually going to add these into the rose cluster area. I have wired them all individually and then clustered them back together and wrapped them onto a pick, a wooden pick, so that they remain together. They will be more impactful if they are layered in as one. There we go. And they're cascading down the rose valley, looking really beautiful. Okay. Now additionally, for my last aromatic, I have some rosemary. Again, it's going to dry just like it looks, so that can become part of our design in the foam. It can also be set into the back part of the design. And it's a beautiful line foliage, so it will help direct the eye from here all the way through to here, to the front. It does have pretty woody stem though, so it can you need to use your muscles to cut it, that's for sure. There we go. The tonation of the underside of the rosemary goes perfectly with the gray tone of the eucalyptus as well. Ugh, I love smelling rosemary when I'm working with it. It just brings a serenity to my whole design process. Now, if you have any flowers that have a natural downward drape to them, as I did with the amaranthus, and even some of the rosemary pieces have a natural downward curve, use that to your advantage and place that at the bottom where it can drape down and help you cover the lower part of your mechanics. Okay, I've just found another piece of eucalyptus. I'm going to go ahead and add that in. Okay. And then lastly, I'd like to add some of these fluffy grass pieces. So this came off of an ornamental grass in my garden actually. It sprouts gosh, I don't even know what to call these. The beautiful puffs at the end of the fall season. I cut them and dry them and they open up and they look like this. I do hit them with a little bit of hairspray to make sure that all the bits stay attached. And then I love to use them in my designs. I mean, just look at how ethereal that is. It's really, really gorgeous. So, of course, these are already dried, so we can use these in the back. And I'm actually going to have this spill a bit from the back over onto the basket to, again, provide some unity between the basket and the design. There we go. Isn't that beautiful? And then I've got this second piece here that I'm going to bring up through the front. Okay, so let me give this a quick spin and make sure we've covered our mechanics thoroughly. That is really beautiful. I'm really happy with the bounty that we've created for a Thanksgiving table. I hope you've enjoyed my cornucopia design and that you've learned a thing or two. Thanks for watching.